Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Graciela Ortiz's personal life could not be called happy. Of course, she tried her best to pretend that her family was no different from others and that it was just an ordinary family. But it was far from the truth. Graciela's husband's behavior had been less than desirable for the past few years of their married life. Red flags had been evident long before Graciela realized that Conrado Cruz had married her solely for the opportunity to secure a comfortable position. Yes, perhaps he had some feelings for her at the beginning of their romantic relationship, even being in love and courting her greatly. But when problems arose, causing the budget to dwindle rapidly, the man almost left the family. Conrado spent more and more of his free time away from home. Over the years in a foreign city, he had managed to make friends and acquaintances. Graciela didn't say a word to her husband about her worries, as she was afraid of a divorce, but her parents, on the other hand, regularly hinted that it was time to solve the family issues firmly and uncompromisingly. "He does nothing for the family," Graciela's mother, Blanca Ortiz, protested each time her daughter complained about married life. "How long will this go on like this? You've been living like neighbors for several years. I don't see the point in such a life together. I don't understand what you're waiting for, it won't get any better. Divorce him, and that's the end of it. Especially since he spends the part of the family budget that should go to you and your daughter. It shouldn't be like this." Blanca never liked Conrado from the start. From the first day of their acquaintance, she experienced unfavorable feelings towards him. The woman was also bothered by his mother, who was a real meddler, and the fact that he was completely out of their circle. Graciela had been raised in a good, intelligent family and had lived her entire life in a big city. Her parents were not wealthy but highly educated. Blanca and Paulo Ortiz highly valued education and instilled in their daughter a passion for knowledge from an early age. So, Graciela's parents were concerned when they met a guy who barely finished school and moved from the village to the big city solely in search of a better life. "Why do you like him?" Blanca wondered. "You're completely different. I can't imagine how you can build a life with such a person." But Graciela was in love and didn't notice anyone or anything around her. At that time, she had already graduated from college and landed a job at a good company. Graciela didn't plan to start a family so soon. For a few years, she wanted to work, build her career, and then get married. But circumstances turned out differently. While she held the position of junior manager, Conrado was just a simple loader. He was an unremarkable young man with a modest income. It seemed unlikely that a young and promising girl like her would find anything in common with him. On the day they first met, Conrado, along with other men, was unloading goods at the warehouse, and Graciela, who didn't agree with the inventory position, decided to double-check everything herself. Yes, she could have let it go and asked another colleague to verify the position, but the sense of responsibility instilled in her from an early age prevented her from delegating such a crucial task to someone else. Conrado charmed her from the first glance. He was completely unlike the other loaders. Returning from the warehouse to the office with a stack of papers, Graciela almost knocked Conrado off his feet. "Oh, sorry," the girl said, flustered, when, not noticing anything around her, she bumped right into the chest of the unfamiliar man. "I'm so clumsy. I've got so much to do, I'm in my thoughts, that's why I didn't see you." "No problem," Conrado replied, trying to smile as charmingly as possible. "Can I help you? These folders are quite heavy." Graciela willingly accepted the young man's offer. She could hardly carry heavy loads herself and, holding huge folders with documents in her hands, regretted not inviting a colleague from the office to come with her to the warehouse. Conrado immediately took charge of the situation. On the same evening, when the workday came to an end, he patiently waited for Graciela outside the office. She was very surprised when she saw him. The girl thought that the young man was waiting for his significant other or friends to gather somewhere and relax after work. But when he approached her and offered to escort her, Graciela realized that Conrado had been waiting specifically for her. "So, do you want to start with this?" She asked, smiling. I won't hide it, I liked you, he replied. And, as they say, I decided not to waste time. If you don't mind, of course. She didn't mind. Due to her tight work schedule, Graciela had no time for a personal life. None of her colleagues caught her eye. Many men in her department were already married, and her boss, Ignacio Reyes, who had been giving Graciela signs of attention since her first day at work, seemed too old to her. He was around 37 years old. No one knew anything about his personal life. Sometimes, not very favorable rumors about his relationships with women reached Graciela. Of course, these were just gossip, unrelated to reality, spread by offended and insulted colleagues who were upset that such a prominent and desirable man did not reciprocate their fake feelings. In reality, Ignacio had been terribly lonely for many years. His entire life was devoted solely to work, where he had spent all his days. But very few people knew about this. As befitting a boss, he preferred not to divulge details about his personal life. It was extremely unpleasant for him to hear false gossip about himself, and he did not want to worsen the already complex and ambivalent attitude towards him and the team. What difference does it make between how he looks at you and what he hints you on? Blanca reasoned when Graciela told her about the boss's advances. He's not openly harassing you, is he? Then, just work peacefully. Don't quit now. Think about it, a guy is checking you out. You have to get used to it, my dear. You're a striking, beautiful young woman. Men will always be around you. It's absolutely normal, there's nothing special about it. You're not going to quit because of that, are you? Graciela didn't plan on quitting her job. She felt uncomfortable because her boss, Ignacio, paid too much attention to her, but she made it clear to him that there could be nothing between them. When Graciela grew tired of the constant, unmistakable hints her boss dropped every time she entered his office for various reasons, she openly told him what she thought. Ignacio, I don't know how I should put it delicately, the girl hesitated, but you're too mature for me. Do you understand? So, I strongly ask you to stop courting me. In simpler terms, am I too old for you? The man clarified. I didn't say that, Graciela replied. You know, I don't accept such relationships in my worldview. Perhaps other girls see it differently, but I see it this way, and I won't give up my point of view under any circumstances. If you want, I can quit. No. What are you talking about, Graciela? Ignacio exclaimed. Why quit? I promise you, I won't bother you anymore, honestly. If it's unpleasant for you, I don't need it. Good. At that moment, Graciela was very surprised at herself. She didn't expect to be able to express herself so clearly and concretely to him, and she wasn't scared and didn't hesitate to say everything she wanted. Marveling at her own straightforwardness, Graciela thought about this conversation all day long. What if he fires me, she thought to herself with horror. Maybe I spoke to him too harshly and should have said it softer. You've already said it, that's it, Blanca reassured her daughter. Were you supposed to endure all this endlessly? If something bothers you, you have every right to openly express it. And if he fires you, you'll find another job, it's not a big deal. You have a diploma, and you already have some experience, you'll find a place somewhere. You're not old. And, Graciela, I don't understand why you grew up so unsure of yourself. It's like I'm never at a loss for words, and you're always afraid of everything. You always doubt everything. Come on, you should stop it. You still have your whole life to live. If you're constantly afraid of everything and focus on every little thing, you won't have enough strength and nerves. Graciela's nerves were indeed in a terrible state, and she knew it. She could spend weeks worrying about trivial matters, contemplating various scenarios of events in one situation or another. In most cases, all her mental torments were unjustified and did not pay off, but from time to time, she still continued to revisit unresolved situations and replay them in her mind. She didn't know why she had grown so shy and unsure of herself. Blanca had always been a woman with a strong character, and she tried to instill in her daughter the personal qualities that she liked in herself. But despite her mother's efforts, Graciela turned out to be the complete opposite. She was very afraid of being alone, even though she sometimes pretended to convince herself that family wasn't the most important thing and she could live her life without it. She was critical of her appearance. Yes, Graciela was never a beauty, but that wasn't the point. She simply did not value herself at all and constantly compared herself to other girls her age, drawing conclusions that were not in her favor. People like Conrado sensed this, and that's why it was absolutely no trouble for him to win Graciela's heart in the shortest possible time. Yes, she wasn't the most advantageous option, but other girls with higher education and good career prospects wouldn't even look at him. At the time of meeting Graciela, Conrado, like all newcomers to the big city, lived in a rented room and dreamed of moving out as soon as possible. Blanca, the opponent of her daughter's marriage, categorically did not want the newlyweds to live under the same roof as them. She couldn't stand her son-in-law, and after meeting his mother, a brazen and unprincipled countrywoman, her attitude towards her daughter's husband only worsened. "Paolo, we need to find a solution to this issue," she said, 2 weeks after the wedding. Blanca regretted not talking to her husband before Graciela and Conrado officially married. It would have been better for everyone if the issue of housing for the young family had been resolved immediately, but Blanca couldn't find the right words. She saw that Paolo wasn't strongly against Graciela's marriage. "Blanca, why are you worried so much?" he reasoned. "Not everyone is born into prosperity. We don't have golden toilets, but we're not dreaming of them either. We live normally. And so will they. Yes, Conrado's family is simple and rural, he's nobody, but Rome wasn't built in a day. Maybe they really love each other. Let Graciela decide for herself who she wants to spend her life with." "What kind of love is there?" Blanca protested. "He wants to move into our apartment, and then he'll freeload off us. Any day is better than suffering as a loader for 12 hours. We know such provincial machos. Mark my words, he won't care about the family at all. If Graciela marries him, she'll be working hard alone, and as soon as the opportunity arises, he'll lie on the couch and talk about how hard it is in this world to make a living for an ordinary person without money, connections, or education." Paolo didn't want to argue with his wife, so he preferred to avoid such conversations whenever possible. When Blanca got upset and started talking nonstop, trying to persuade her husband to influence their daughter, Paolo referred to urgent matters. His work schedule was irregular, so his wife didn't suspect that he was lying to her. When the issue of housing for the young family came up, Paolo tried to convince his wife of the absurdity of the idea of buying a separate apartment for Graciela and Conrado. "But you yourself say that he's using her, and at the same time, you want us to buy them a separate apartment. Blanca, I don't understand you. It seems to me that it's illogical. Let them live with us, we'll watch them every day. We'll be able to monitor what's happening in their family." Paolo tried to explain to his wife that this would be the right thing to do. However, Blanca categorically did not want to live under the same roof as her son-in-law, and Paolo had to accept it and give in. Yet, Conrado himself had no desire to move from a 4-room apartment to a small one, and he openly said this to Graciela when she told him that her parents had decided to buy them an apartment. "Wow, we'll live in a small apartment," the young man reasoned. "No thanks, I've already lived like that, I don't want it anymore." "And what if we have a child? Will we move with you to the kitchen? Is that the plan?" This was the first alarming sign that Graciela should have paid attention to. However, she let her husband's words pass by, attaching no importance to them. She explained her reaction to the fact that Conrado had been forced to live in a crowded house, first with a large family, and then in a rented room for a long time. Conrado's mother raised 3 children on her own, with Conrado being the oldest. Starting in his teenage years, he bore a colossal burden. His mother repeatedly asked him to babysit his younger siblings, help them with homework, and do various other tasks. The woman worked tirelessly, but the money was still not enough. When Conrado mentioned that he wanted to live his own life, his mother accused him of not caring about the family. When the younger ones grow up, you can focus on your life, the woman grumbled. But for now, you have a family, you selfish thing. Conrado didn't want to argue with his mother. He understood that it was very difficult for the woman to raise and support 3 children without their father. If the man had not left this world so early, the family would have been more or less prosperous, just like when Conrado was a very young boy. However, we can't go back in time, and it is impossible to go against fate. What was destined to happen happened, and neither Conrado nor Pamela could do anything about it, no matter how much they wanted to. Leaving for the big city, Conrado promised to send money to his mother so that she wouldn't have to support the younger ones alone. He thought it was only fair, and he had no intention of shirking his family responsibilities. However, Pamela initially treated this skeptically. "What will be left of your salary then?" The woman waved her hands, not wanting her son to leave. "We need you here." But the young man did not intend to deviate from his decision. He wanted to try his luck, and life in the city, even the poorest and least promising, was still much better than in the village. As promised, he faithfully sent money to the family after the move, but he rarely called or wrote. Frankly, during the time Conrado lived away from the family, he felt absolutely free. He had no intention of going back home, and he tried to talk to his mother as rarely as possible to avoid hearing reproaches, no matter what he did. He should have invited his mother to the wedding, even though he understood that she would embarrass him. However, this didn't particularly scare him. Conrado was confident that Graciela was hooked on him. If she thought he was her only chance for her personal life and turned a blind eye to his greed and avarice, then she would certainly pay no attention to the behavior of her mother-in-law, with whom they would meet only a few times in their lives. And Conrado was right. When he, trying his best to hide any insincerity, apologized to Graciela for his mother's behavior, she simply waved it off. "Don't worry about it," she said. "I understand everything. She's from the village, not very well-mannered, nothing terrible. But my parents didn't like it at all. Don't worry, I'll talk to them." At the wedding, Pamela behaved as if she were the queen of life, as if she were marrying not a country boy but a foreign prince. Without mincing words, she took every opportunity to say something bitter about the bride and her family. "What?" she sarcastically asked when she saw Blanca's disdainful look directed at her. "I guess a girl with such a face can't get married anymore," but Conrado showed interest only because there's no roof over his head in the city. If Blanca still tried to play nice and hide her dislike in front of the groom, she was clearly not going to tolerate her mother-in-law's antics. "All right then," she said, approaching the woman closely and grabbing her hand. "Don't ever get on my way again. After the wedding, you should not appear near my family. And one more thing, if I hear anything like that about my daughter from you again, blame yourself. Got it?" "Not bad for someone who claims to be an intelligent person," Pamela grumbled, displeased. "Talking like a street girl and still trying to act important. I don't need to come to your dump, I have my own house." Blanca smirked. "An old hut, where even your wife would be ashamed to visit." The woman's grandfather was a big fan of strong language and never hesitated to use explicit expressions. Often visiting him on weekends in her early childhood, Blanca picked up various words and phrases from him. In everyday life, she never used them in conversation and tried to hide that she could speak in such a tone at all. However, Pamela provoked her so much that she pulled out all her eloquence and responded in a way that the woman would remember for a long time. Pamela couldn't control her emotions and, pulling her son aside, expressed everything she thought about Graciela and her family. "Why the hell did you settle for this ugly girl?" she spitefully asked. "Are you after her money? She's far from being a millionaire. Couldn't you find someone better and prettier at the same time?" Conrado had a hard time calming his mother and preventing a scandal at the wedding. After celebrating the festivities, the woman returned to the village. Conrado continued to send money to his mother, younger sister, and brother, but he almost didn't communicate with her. The young man realized that mutual understanding was out of the question. The woman behaved too aggressively towards Graciela and her family. Engaging in a confrontation with them was definitely not in his plans, especially when, a year after the wedding, Graciela began to climb up the career ladder. By that time, they were already living in the apartment Blanca and Paulo had acquired for them, although Conrado had no legal connection to it. When Graciela's parents bought the property, they registered it in their names and later transferred it to their daughter through a gift deed. Conrado was quite displeased with such distrust from his wife's parents, as well as the fact that she didn't stand up for him in front of them. However, he chose not to make a scene about it, as the consequences could be unpredictable. In one of their conversations, Conrado simply asked why Graciela hadn't talked to her parents about it. She felt it was necessary to explain herself to her husband, understanding that such actions by her parents could hurt him. But she had no control over it. Blanca immediately stated that they would buy the apartment only on those conditions. "We don't need it," Graciela replied. "Conrado, by the way, doesn't want to move." "Of course he doesn't," the mother retorted. "He wouldn't want to. Living independently with the family is not the same as living under the roof of the wife's parents, who will feed and take care of him. If I'm not mistaken, he decided to quit his job. He was ashamed to be just an ordinary laborer. Am I right?" Conrado did find another job, but solely to continue sending money to his mother, whose outrage would have known no bounds if he stopped sponsoring her and his younger brother and sister. Conrado had no intention of getting a higher-paying job for the sake of the family, and he couldn't even do it if he wanted to. He lacked education, experience, and any valuable skills that could interest reputable employers. Changing from working long hours to becoming a consultant in one of the stores, Conrado had a shift schedule, leaving him with more free time to relax. Graciela, on the other hand, worked hard to earn money and have a financial cushion. She really wanted a child and planned to take maternity leave in the coming years. Ignacio, who still had feelings for Graciela, was shocked when he learned who she had married but chose not to comment on the matter. The man was accustomed to keeping his word. He actively helped Graciela advance in her career, expressing his affection for her in this way. After several years, Graciela held the position of senior manager. From a young, inexperienced girl, she had transformed into a mature, serious woman accustomed to independent living and hard work. Conrado, on the other hand, continued to work as a store clerk, earning a very modest salary, which he sent entirely to Pamela. Blanca and Paulo had long realized that their son-in-law had no intention of achieving anything in life. But every time the mother expressed dissatisfaction about it, trying to convince her daughter to get a divorce, Graciela tried to change the subject of the conversation immediately. She only discussed her husband and their relationship with her mother when she became too persistent, and Graciela had no other way out. "Mom, why do you keep bringing it up?" Graciela protested. "Money, money. You suggest I split the family budget? But that's not how it's done. It's not humane. You and Dad would never do that, and you advised me to leave my husband with no support." "Your father didn't marry me for money," Blanca replied, unable to comprehend how someone could be so blind. Communicating with her daughter increasingly irritated the woman. She looked at Graciela and marveled. She seems like a mature and already established person, serious, responsible. But when it comes to this good-for-nothing, she behaves like a child, always justifying him as if she doesn't notice that he's sucking money out of her like a vacuum cleaner. Moreover, she plans to have a child with him. In a word, she's crazy. I simply can't find other words. Blanca hoped that someday Graciela would have a moment of realization in her life, understanding what her husband was really like and throwing him out of the house. And it happened, but not as quickly as the woman had hoped. Several years passed before the fateful event in Graciela's family. During this time, Conrado managed to gain complete trust from his wife, including in financial matters. Graciela, not heeding her mother's words, not only did not restrict her husband's spending but also gave him access to her account so that Conrado could pay for whatever he needed at any time. The wife was confident that she would never spend an extra penny. Conrado tried to behave in a way that would earn Graciella's trust, so her attitude towards him was predictable, and besides, he had everything he needed. However, Conrado never thought about the fact that there were still his mother, brother, and sister, who would sooner or later run out of the money he sent them. The new requests came as a complete surprise to him, as did the betrayal he committed towards Graciella because of them. Conrado put his wife in a completely untenable position. She could never forgive him for such a thing, even if she wanted to very badly. Conrado, you understand that our daughter is seriously ill and may die. She needs urgent surgery. I'm dealing with the issue of the foreign clinic now, and we have to give an answer any day now. Maybe you'll finally tear yourself away from your important matters and come with me to the hospital. That morning, Graciella tried to reach her husband, who had been talking on the phone with his mother for the past 2 weeks and had completely distanced himself from family matters. Conrado seemed to be unreachable, and Graciella couldn't do anything about it. The woman's pregnancy was long awaited and very desired. She had been waiting for it for many years and, at one point, even despaired, entertaining the dreadful thought that she might never become a mother. Conrado was indifferent and apathetic about the question of having children. Every time Graciella brought up the topic of kids, her husband either changed the subject or mused lethargically about how they still had time. However, the years passed, and there was still no progress in that direction, greatly worrying Graciella. She consulted all possible doctors to find out what was wrong. Maybe you could go and get tested with me? The doctor said that the issue could very well be with you, so we could know for sure, she suggested. Graciella had repeatedly tried to convince her husband to undergo the necessary compatibility tests, but Conrado categorically refused to do so. It's not that he didn't want children at all. By the time Graciella started seriously planning a pregnancy, they had already expanded their living space and moved to a new apartment. Graciella earned a decent income, so she could count on a respectable maternity leave. However, Conrado was concerned about how much their lives would change after the arrival of a child. Maybe we could adopt someone? He suggested, pretending to be generally interested in the question of fatherhood but subtly hinting that listening to children's cries and losing sleep at night was entirely unnecessary for him. However, Graciella immediately dismissed such an option as soon as she heard that Conrado was seriously considering that she might prefer an adopted child to the joy of true motherhood with a newborn. No, it won't happen, Graciella firmly stated. We should have our own children. I won't raise someone else's child. That's out of the question. Conrado had no choice but to accept his wife's persistence, hoping that if she hadn't become pregnant in such a long time, it might never happen. But after some time, Graciella shared joyful news with Conrado, who, for a while, didn't know how to react. I don't understand. Aren't you happy? Graciella asked when she saw her husband's puzzled expression. Aren't you glad we're having a baby? You could at least show some enthusiasm. I've been waiting for this for so long, and here you look sourly. Honestly, it's very unpleasant for me. I expected a completely different reaction from you. Oh my God. Blanca reflected to herself when her daughter told her about how Conrado's mood changed as soon as he learned about the pregnancy. She's been living with him for so many years and still hopes for something. I can't understand that. Over the years, Blanca's attitude towards her son-in-law has not changed at all. She still struggled with Conrado's presence next to her daughter. The woman could not forgive herself for not convincing Graciella to register the new apartment through a gift deed. After the purchase, Conrado became an equal owner, just like her. This meant that in the event of divorce, he could claim half of the apartment as jointly acquired property, which infuriated Blanca. By the way, your father and I bought the first apartment for you, and we didn't agree that you would decide to sell it, the woman protested. You didn't consult with us, putting us before the facts. It's wrong, Graciella. Now it turns out that part of our hard-earned money belongs to this ragamuffin. This is unacceptable. Mom, he's not a ragamuffin, but my legal husband, Graciella replied. Stop insulting him in front of me, you have no right to do that. We've been living together for many years, and Conrado has never said a bad word about you even once. Yes, of course, Blanca retorted sarcastically. He didn't say anything. What an honor. Maybe I should thank him and fall at his feet. He may not speak, but he thinks loudly. I know very well how he feels about me. And I don't need to know anything more, everything is clear. Mom, you are too critical of Conrado, Graciela shrugged off, avoiding even admitting to herself what her husband represented. Somewhere deep inside, she felt how Conrado truly treated her. It was noticeable to the naked eye, but Graciela preferred to squint to avoid the painful and embarrassing reality. Meanwhile, Conrado continued to take advantage of his position, but now he needed money from Graciela himself. Conrado didn't spend excessively. By nature, he was lazy and undemanding, a big fan of comfort who preferred not to exert himself. This kind of life suited him more than well. However, Pamela's needs and the growing demands of his younger brother and sister were increasing each day. The money Conrado sent them was no longer sufficient, they wanted more. In particular, his mother suddenly demanded his help in buying a new house. Nora and Roberto were planning to start their families, and in the future, they needed their own housing, at least for the two of them, because the maternal home, small for two families, was already starting to age. Son, if you don't help me, they'll throw me out on the street, Pamela whined over the phone. You just can't abandon me in this situation. Of course, the woman exaggerated and played on him, but Conrado couldn't stand family disputes. Nora and Roberto said one thing, their mother said something completely different. On the second day of all these discussions, his head was spinning, but the family had no intention of stopping, pressing even harder on their son and brother. Why is she surprised about? Nora protested. She should have thought about all this earlier and taken care of it somehow. She understood that sooner or later the housing issue would become acute and that it would need to be solved. Nora, you should understand that Mom has never had and never will have the money to buy you a separate house. You're not a child anymore, and you know that our family is very poor. Mom has been supporting all of you on her own all her life. How can you and Roberto have the conscience to demand something? If you want to live better, go to the city, earn money, and arrange your life. Conrado tried to explain to his sister that she was wrong, but it was all in vain. All his brotherly words were taken as an affront. She was rude and snapped at him. Go to the city, you say? Nora replied. Is that what you plan to do, dear brother? I should marry some ugly guy to live off him. Right? And even have a sick child with him. But no, I'll never stoop to that. And if you're so smart and wealthy, then buy a separate house for us and Roberto and keep being the smart guy. When the family needs help, you hide right away. But when it comes to giving advice, you're the first. Conrado was tired of all this, all these pointless conversations and accusations poured on him by relatives he didn't want anything to do with. When he realized that he was on the verge, he began to browse through ads for houses for sale in his and neighboring villages. Damn it, he thought to himself, Graciela has money in the account, it's needed now, most likely. And when there's a need for it, she'll have time to save or borrow from her parents and then repay them. Conrado was ready for absolutely anything just to put an end to the daily family scandals. After talks with his mother, he felt so drained and exhausted that all he wanted was to sleep. At that moment, he seemed to forget about his daughter entirely. Conrado was convinced that the girl wouldn't undergo the operation anytime soon. It would take time to gather the necessary analyses to find a suitable donor. Even though Graciela talked about the surgery being conducted almost immediately, Conrado didn't put much belief in it. She had spoken the same way several months ago but hadn't managed to come to an agreement with either the doctor or the foreign clinic. She'll manage, he reasoned to himself, unaware that he was depriving his own daughter of money to which he had no right. He just wanted to close the issue with his mother, sister, and brother, and then he would surely find the right words to explain things to his wife. At that time, Conrado couldn't imagine how his action would end and that it would be the last straw for Graciela, who, despite justifying her husband to her mother and father, closing her eyes to his behavior, and continuing to live with him for the sake of having a father for her daughter, understood that sooner or later there would come a moment when she would no longer want to endure all of this. And that moment happened unexpectedly for Conrado. Graciela noticed the lack of funds in the account not immediately, but only a few weeks after Pamela had already moved into the new house purchased by her son. Usually, she didn't thoroughly check the balance. Graciela knew that the money was there, and she could use it at any time. Conrado turned out to be right. They only kept postponing the surgery. During all the time that Graciela had been waiting to send her daughter abroad, they had already lost 2 potential donors. The first time, someone submitted their data earlier, and they didn't make it. The second time, doctors refused to perform the operation due to health problems with the donor, revealed during the examination. This attempt was supposed to be the last. Graciela only had to make the prepayment, and within a week, Irma was supposed to undergo surgery. Imagine her surprise when she discovered that the necessary amount was missing from the account. Thoughts were racing through her mind at a frenzied pace, replacing each other. Graciela was furious. Without leaving the hospital, she called Conrado, but there was nothing coherent in her response. "Let's talk about it at home," the man mumbled. "I'll explain everything. I just didn't want to tell you about this. You have to understand." "What are you going to explain to me?" Graciela interrupted her husband, exclaiming, "That you robbed me and your own daughter, taking advantage of my trust. How could you? Don't you realize that your antics could cost Irma her life? I don't want to hear any explanations. I demand that you return the money you stole from me and our daughter right now. By evening, they must be back in my account so that I can make the payment for the surgery and bring our daughter back from abroad. And we'll need to talk one more time." Graciela didn't listen to what her husband continued to mutter to her on the phone. Out of anger, she threw the phone on the bench, and a few minutes later, when she came to her senses and calmed down a bit, she hung up. That day marked the biggest scandal between her and her husband in their entire married life. Graciela was horrified when she got to know that her hard-earned money, which she had saved bit by bit for a rainy day that suddenly arrived, was spent on a house for his mother. "Maybe you'll tell me what to do now?" Graciela asked, bewildered, tired of shouting at her husband and expressing everything she thought of him. She had said everything, and there was nothing more to add. The question of their future together with Conrado was definitively resolved the moment he started justifying his actions. Graciela couldn't comprehend how someone could behave like this. "The house for Mom?" she exclaimed indignantly. "Does she have nowhere to live?" "But we are one family," Conrado mumbled in response, feigning perplexity. "The younger ones grew up, they want to live independently, and the house where they are forced to live together is a real hovel. You never even went there with me, even though I asked you so many times to visit my mom. You always turned up your nose." "Oh, really? Did I?" Graciela exclaimed. "Your mother has hated me since the very first day we met. Why should I tolerate her rudeness and humiliation? What did she tell you about Irma? And you didn't say a word to her either, even though she's your own daughter, by the way, your only daughter, Conrado, but you seem to not care about me or her. My God, how blind I was to trust you. How could I overlook your despicable and disgusting personality? My mother was right when she advised me not to get involved with you. You shouldn't even be looked at. You would have worked your whole life as a loader, lingering in a rented room. You are not capable of anything more." "Well, dear, that's too much," Conrado protested. "I can get offended." At that moment, Graciela completely lost touch with reality and stopped understanding what was happening. Is he really such a fool, or is he pretending? She pondered to herself. What offenses? What is he even talking about? Or did I vaguely give him the impression that I'm filing for divorce? You were living with him for the sake of a daughter whom he is killing with his own hands, Blanca sighed when she learned about what had happened in her daughter's family. Who told me that a child needs a father? Yes, and to be honest, I don't believe that he spent all his money on a little house for Mom. It's not the palace he bought for her. In the village, houses cost pennies, and he practically took the whole amount for his mother. Let him tell these tales to someone else, just not me. And Blanca was right. Conrado gave part of the money to Nora and Roberto, so to speak, for the first years of adult life. Of course, he told his brother and sister that it was a one-time thing because he simply didn't have any money, but they probably didn't take those words too seriously. However, at that moment, Graciela wasn't overly concerned about that. Her daughter's life was at stake, and she needed to save her. There might not be another chance to perform the surgery with a suitable donor. She had to take action quickly and decisively, here and now. Your father and I don't have that kind of money, Graciela replied to Blanca when she asked if the parents could lend her the necessary amount. We can give you some part of it, of course, but it's unlikely to be enough. We won't be able to sell the apartment so quickly. If we take money as a mortgage, we'll condemn ourselves to trouble. You need to look for some other options. Graciela didn't know what to do. She didn't have friends or acquaintances with such a sum. They could collect the money bit by bit if she asked, but that would take a lot of time, which Graciela didn't have. What if you talked to Ignacio? Her mother interrupted her thoughts, and asked him, of course, for a loan. I think it's not such a significant amount for him. After all, he is a wealthy man. I'm sure he won't refuse you. Hearing her mother's words, Graciela almost lost her speech. Goosebumps ran down her spine. No, not this, she thought to herself, recalling the only conversation with her boss after her marriage, which he decided to have despite his promise never to interfere in Graciela's personal life or show her any signs of attention. I would really like to talk to you, Ignacio said after Graciela received a promotion. Face to face. I have a few questions for you. If you don't mind. How could she refuse him? At that moment, unpleasant thoughts crept into Graciela's mind. He's going to demand that I work off the promotion, she thought with horror, already mentally preparing to say goodbye to both a good job and a decent salary by writing a resignation letter. She hadn't planned to get involved with a man under any circumstances, so her life wouldn't depend on it. Graciela expected anything from her boss, and she could hardly overcome her fear, which almost overwhelmed her on the way to his office. Why are you shaking like that? Ignacio asked when Graciela, with wobbly legs, entered the office and sat across from him. Is something wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? No, not at all, Graciela replied, trying to smile as sincerely as possible and behave naturally. I'm just a little nervous, you know, not every day the boss calls you in for a conversation. That's true, Ignacio agreed and put the kettle on. Let's have a cup of coffee now, and then we'll talk. Just promise me you won't get offended if I ask you a few personal questions, so to speak. Something bothers me, and I'd really like to know for sure. If it's possible and you don't mind. Here we go, Graciela thought to herself, not hearing anything good for herself in the boss's words. Her fears were confirmed a few minutes later when, gathering her courage and summoning up the audacity, Ignacio began to ask about her personal life, after which he made a marriage proposal to the woman. Are you really happy with him? But what makes him better than me? Just because he's closer to your age? He's worthless, lazy, absolutely unpromising, and, on top of that, a rotten person. How can you live with him? He's not even worth your little finger. It seemed that at that moment he had completely lost control over himself and allowed himself to express everything that had accumulated in his soul during all the time he had to watch the woman he loved literally destroy her life. Do you understand that every day with him is a wasted day? The man continued. What can he give you? He even quit his job, so he doesn't have to support the family and can sit on your neck. Why do you need such a husband? Graciela listened to her boss with wide open eyes and didn't know what to do. She wanted so much to slap him. But she couldn't, after all, subordination and the age difference prevented her from doing so. That's why Graciela let him finish, and then she said her piece. Ignacio, Graciela said sternly but politely when the boss finished, we seemed to agree that you would never again allow yourself to interfere in my life. I also want to remind you that you gave me your word never to make any attempts to get closer to me. And what is happening now? Does your word mean nothing? You said it and forgot, is that it? Don't you think it's unfair to me? Graciela decided to remind her boss of the promise he himself had made. The woman simply saw no other way to stop his eloquence and put an end not only to implicit hints but also to explicit advances towards her. If she had started insulting him and passionately defending Conrado, a scandal would have erupted. And at that moment, it was very important for her to keep this job. And not only because it brought in a good income. Graciela, by her nature, remained a timid and closed person despite her efforts to hide it. She didn't want to integrate into a new team. In her case, dismissal would cause not only financial problems but also severe emotional and psychological stress. She had no desire to spend her savings while sitting without income and looking for a job. At that stage of her life, she was saving for future maternity leave, which was very important for Graciela. Therefore, the woman did her best to smooth out the rough edges of a difficult conversation with her boss. And, fortunately, she succeeded. After a few minutes, Ignacio scolded himself and apologized to Graciela. "I'm sorry," he said thoughtfully. "What was that? I completely lost my mind." "I'm sorry, Graciela. I promise you that we will never go back to this conversation." "Can I go?" Graciela asked. "Yes, of course, you can go," Ignacio replied, who couldn't believe he had just allowed himself to cross the line of what was acceptable. He caught himself thinking that he didn't regret it at all. He was glad that he could finally tell Graciela everything he thought and confess his feelings, which were only getting stronger with each passing day. How happy he was when Conrado resigned from his company. It was a true stroke of luck. The man simply couldn't bear the thought of this street rat, married to his beloved woman, occasionally appearing before his eyes. Yes, as a boss, he wasn't obligated to interact with loaders, and, in fact, he didn't even know some employees by face, a constant turnover. Like in any other company, loaders in Ignacio's firm changed so quickly that even the warehouse supervisor couldn't keep up with them, which was quite understandable. The work was hard, and the pay wasn't significantly high. People agreed to such labor for lack of better options, certainly not to achieve any career success, which such a job simply didn't entail. But even though Conrado was one of the lowest-level employees, with whom Ignacio might not cross paths at all, the mere fact of his presence in the company's office sent shivers down the man's spine. He didn't want to accidentally witness Graciela and Conrado leaving work together or catch snippets of their conversations. It was beyond his strength. Ignacio disdained people like Conrado. He was convinced that a man should be a man, not a doormat and a sycophant, which is what Conrado was. Strangely, women often noticed guys like him, which irritated Ignacio even more. He sincerely didn't understand what she saw in him. If someone else, a young, successful man with great prospects and ambitions, were in his place, it's quite possible that the man wouldn't be so upset and would reconcile with the fact that Graciela would never be with him. But losing to a man like Conrado, whom he couldn't even consider a worthy rival, was beneath his dignity. That's why the man didn't want to see him, even accidentally, once in half a year or a year, never. And this was the person Graciela had to ask for money for her daughter's treatment, and it just didn't make sense to her. "And how do you imagine this, Mom?" she asked. "Just come and say, 'Excuse me, could you help me?' Don't you think it's absurd?" "But you didn't tell me about your conversation," Blanca replied. "On the other hand, is he wrong? Is your husband, whom you lived with for so many years by your own choice, really a scoundrel? I told you that from the very beginning, but you didn't listen to me. Until you got to know how he really treated you and saw the real face of your Conrado, you didn't understand. Well, now you have to deal with it yourself. We'll help you as much as we can, but I can't figure out how we can help you in this situation." Never before in her life was Graciela in such despair. After the conversation with her mother, she realized that, apart from Ignacio, she really had no one to ask for help. But at that moment, nothing else mattered to her. It seemed to Graciela that time had stopped, and all her thoughts were revolving only around how to help her daughter. She couldn't bear the thought of Irma leaving this world because of her husband's despicable act. She's still so young, with her whole life ahead of her. It would be terribly unfair if she died. Graciela was ready for absolutely anything just to save her daughter. The humiliations she was about to endure were inconsequential compared to the life of her little girl. Even if she had to stoop too low to get the necessary amount to pay for the surgery, she was prepared for it. Having gathered her thoughts, the very next morning, Graciela headed to the office. Conrado had a day off that day, and he, as usual, was sleeping, not even stirring when his wife was getting ready for work. "All right, I'll deal with you later," Graciela thought to herself. "Sleep while you can. Soon you'll be heading to my mother's, and you won't get to rest on her couch or nap until lunch." Graciela suddenly caught herself thinking that she wasn't angry with her husband at all. The only thing she truly wanted was for Conrado to leave her life once and for all. But at that moment, she had no time to have arguments with him. She rushed to the office at full speed to quickly address the issue of money. The clinic was supposed to call any day now, and by that time, Graciela needed to have the money ready. Surprisingly, Ignacio treated her visit with understanding and, making a friendly gesture when Graciela appeared at the door of his office, asked, "What are you doing here?" Graciela couldn't immediately find the right words to explain the reason for her visit to the man. It was crucial for her that Ignacio understood her correctly and didn't interpret her request in his own way. With great difficulty and occasional deep pauses, Graciela managed to tell him what she wanted. The man's reaction turned out to be unexpected for her. "No problem," he said. "I am ready to give you the necessary amount, and not as a loan, just like that, free of charge. I won't ask for anything in return from you. The life of a child is the most important thing in the world, and no amount of money can be more valuable than that. Well, if you still decide to return me the money, I won't insist that you don't. I don't want to put you in an awkward position. You know perfectly well how I feel about you, and I'm ready to help you." Graciela was shocked by what she heard. She expected anything but this. "Does he really want to give me money just like that?" she thought to herself. But even if not, it didn't matter at all. She was willing to work for him for free for as long as needed, just to pay for her daughter's crucial surgery. Most importantly, she managed to avoid the humiliation she dreaded the day before. Whatever happened, she had no desire to fall so low. Although Graciela understood that if he asked or even hinted, she would have to do it, fortunately, this was avoided. By his nature, Ignacio was completely different. He knew his worth and would never allow himself to be humiliated like that. If she could love him, that would be wonderful. However, by providing Graciela with help well within his means, the man did not expect her to reciprocate his feelings someday. He didn't expect anything at all. He just wanted to support the woman he loved, who found herself in an extremely difficult life situation, and he was so glad that he had the opportunity to do so that she turned to him for help. The man transferred the money to Graciela's account on the same day, and she immediately made the payment to the clinic, providing Ignacio with the receipt. "It was entirely unnecessary," he said. "Why? Why?" Graciela was surprised. "So that you don't think I asked you for money for my own needs. I really need it for my daughter. Any day now, we have to fly abroad, where Irma will undergo surgery. I won't be at work for about 3 months. I understand it's been a long time, but there's no other way. My daughter's life is at stake, and for her, I'm ready for anything. I'll take leave at my own expense." "There's no need for that," Graciela assured Ignacio. "You can go without it. Come back as soon as you've sorted out all your problems, and besides, I've already proven that I'm not your enemy, and I don't wish anything bad for you. If you need, I can drive you to the airport," Ignacio said. "And in general, if you need any further help, just let me know, don't hesitate. I'll always try to help you in any way I can, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure both you and Irma are well." That's too much already, Graciela thought to herself, and politely refusing, citing that her father would take her to the airport, she said goodbye to Ignacio and left his office. Graciela wanted to discuss the situation with her mother before leaving. The woman was worried about the predicament her daughter found herself in. Graciela feared it might escalate into something more, which she didn't want at that moment. But her mother immediately shifted the focus to Conrado, asking her daughter what she planned to do next with her negligent husband. "Are you going to leave with Irma, and he'll stay in your apartment?" Blanca sighed. "Is that normal, in your opinion? Kick him out before you leave, otherwise, he might cause trouble, and you'll have to deal with it later." "Mom, you seem to have forgotten that he's just as much an owner as I am and has every right to live in this apartment," Graciela replied. "But when I come back, I'll definitely deal with him. I have an idea, but to implement it, you and Dad will have to take us in. You and Dad don't mind if I live with you for some time, do you?" "Mind?" Blanca was surprised. "How can we? This is your apartment, just like ours. Of course, come and live as long as you need. I just hope you'll let me know what you've planned so that there won't be any surprises." "Of course, I'll tell you everything," Graciela replied. "Now I need to go home and pack my things." Blanca was genuinely pleased that her daughter had finally seen the light, and she was ready to help her in everything. The woman hoped that after returning from abroad, Graciela would immediately start divorce proceedings. Those were the plans Blanca had for her daughter, who didn't go into details as there was no time for conversations with her mother. "We'll discuss everything later," Graciela said, standing in the doorway. "Everything will be fine." When she came home to pack her and her daughter's things, Conrado was not in the apartment. He probably slept well and went out again with his friends, she thought to herself. Although, perhaps, it's for the best, at least, I'll pack things in peace without him asking me unnecessary questions. Graciela had no intention of telling her husband that she and her daughter were leaving. She decided that if he didn't come home to spend the night, which was quite possible given the tension in their relationship, she would simply leave in the morning and leave him a note. If she did encounter him, she would try to leave in the morning as quietly as possible so as not to wake him. Graciela knew that her husband had several consecutive days off, so he was unlikely to wake up early. Conrado always slept very soundly, and on weekends, it was impossible to wake him up with quiet rustling and preparing breakfast behind a closed door. That evening, Conrado never came home, which was quite expected. In the morning, Graciela went to the hospital for her daughter, and from there, straight to the airport. She bought tickets on the go, and she also booked a hotel room on the way. Luckily, there were available seats. She had no desire to stay for another day and cross paths with her husband. She was glad he didn't come home. She left all explanations for later, although she didn't see any point in them since she had already told Conrado everything she wanted. However, divorce proceedings and the division of jointly acquired property awaited them. "What a fool I was when I put the new apartment in joint ownership with him," she thought to herself, but it was already impossible to change the situation. It was too late. Finding a note on the table, Conrado was very surprised and immediately called Blanca. Despite the fact that she didn't want to, the woman still answered her son-in-law's call, with whom she had absolutely no desire to talk. "Which clinic did she take our daughter to?" the man asked as soon as he heard his mother-in-law's hello on the other end of the line. "Why didn't she warn me?" "Maybe she still had to ask for your permission." Blanca replied that she had no intention of being polite to her son-in-law and believed she had every right to tell him everything she thought about him. "You robbed her, took all her money, put your daughter's life at risk, and you still have the audacity to call me and ask such questions. How can you even say that, Conrado? Come to your senses and get yourself together. It's simply incomprehensible to me how you dared to take so much money from your wife's account and even try to dictate to her what to do. Have you completely lost your mind? But okay, after the divorce, you'll learn to live like all normal people. You won't have Graciela's feeding trough nearby, and you and your mommy will have to work, thanks to my daughter, who got you your own house, and not just that." After these words, Blanca hung up, and Conrado immediately checked his mobile banking app to see if he still had access to the account. To his disappointment, he saw that Graciela had closed it. "How can this be? he exclaimed indignantly. What am I going to do now? What will I live on for the next 3 months until she returns? Of course, as usual, Conrado sent his entire salary to his mother and was left without a penny. Calling Graciela turned out to be extremely useless and unpromising. She didn't answer the phone, and when Conrado started calling her persistently, she even added him to the blacklist. He realized this from the long beeps on the other end of the line for a whole hour. Conrado had no choice but to call his mother and ask her to transfer him at least some money until his next salary and to inform her that he wouldn't be able to send her the entire next salary since he needed something to live on. But instead of help, he received a refusal. Son, what's wrong with you? Pamela wondered. I've already spent almost everything. When was your last paycheck? About 3 weeks ago, if my memory serves me right. I'm already living quite modestly. I only have money left for groceries. What happened? Mom, we need to talk very seriously, Conrado said. I need to tell you something important. What is it, son? Pamela got worried. I can hear you're sad. Yes, Mom, the man sighed and told her everything that had occurred. Instead of support, Conrado received a dose of accusations and reproaches. How is that my concern? Pamela asked. Did I rob Graciela? No. And without money, it seems, I'll be left with nothing. Son, this doesn't seem fair to me. Mom, do you even hear me? Conrado protested. Do you understand that Graciela plans to divorce me? Now I'll have to live on my salary alone. I won't be able to send you everything I earn every month, as I did before. Do you understand that? The conversation with Pamela was utterly useless. Throughout their interaction, Conrado had a clear feeling that he was banging his head against the wall. The woman was too used to shifting her problems onto her son and was not ready to give up the not-so-big privileges that Conrado provided her. She couldn't imagine how she would live if her son suddenly stopped sponsoring her. Everything happening didn't fit into her head. Haven't you tried to reconcile with Graciela? She asked when Conrado tried to explain again that after the divorce, they would all have to change their lifestyles. Pamela, for example, could find a part-time job. Even though she lived in the village, there were limited opportunities for her to earn some money. However, after so many years, she got used to not working. Moreover, she justified her laziness with life fatigue, constantly reminding her son that she raised him, his brother, and his sister independently, without anyone's help. Roberto and Nora had completely relaxed after they got the opportunity to live separately from their mother and regularly organized parties. Of course, there was no talk of starting a family for either the brother or the sister. They simply grew up, and it became too tight for them to live under the same roof as their mother. Also, living under Pamela's constant control, who always had a complex character and a habit of controlling and subjugating everyone, didn't allow them to afford much. What reconciliation are you talking about, Mom? Conrado was surprised. Graciela will never forgive me for having stole her money. At first, I also thought that everything would be okay, but no. After his wife's departure, Conrado realized the reality he faced and began to contemplate what kind of housing he could afford after the exchange of the apartment. Living under the same roof as his mother was definitely not in his plans, so he didn't plan to return to his native village, and there were scarce job opportunities. If a single woman who needed nothing more from life, like Pamela, could find part-time work in the vicinity, young people would clearly have nothing to do there. A few weeks before his wife's arrival, the man spent his time contemplating how to calmly talk to Graciela about everything. He didn't expect her to stay abroad for so long. Strange, he thought, when his wife did not return within the expected time frame with their daughter. Maybe something went wrong. In reality, everything was fine. The operation was successful, and the time Graciela planned for rehabilitation and recovery with her daughter abroad was sufficient. As expected after the transplant, about 3 months had passed. Irma could have returned home with her mother, but Graciela didn't want to go back to the city so soon. Only a few days had passed since her discharge, and she was not against exploring the local surroundings, going on a few excursions, and spending quality time alone with her daughter, reflecting on everything that had happened in her life. This was exactly what she needed at that moment. Graciela called Ignacio and informed him that she would stay longer. She needed to rest, comprehend everything that had happened in her life, recover, and think. Of course, Graciela, Ignacio replied, listening to her and her request. Take as much time off as you need. Work won't run away. Everything is fine. How is Irma? How did the operation go? If you need any more help, let me know, don't hesitate. No, thank you, I don't need anything else, Graciela replied. See you. I'll let you know when I'm ready to return to work. And thanks again for the money. If it weren't for you, I don't know what we would have done. You really saved us and Irma. Graciela spent about 2 more weeks abroad and used this time to relax and think everything over. She returned in good spirits and immediately started addressing the divorce issue. You still haven't told me what you've come up with before leaving, Blanca reminded her daughter. That scoundrel, your husband, has been living alone in your apartment for 4 months now. Are you really going to give him half of the divorce? Graciela thought for a long time about the best course of action and, as a result, abandoned her initial plan. She had considered renting out her share of the apartment to ensure an unpleasant cohabitation for Conrado and attempting to claim the majority of the property, but she changed her mind. Well, the idea, by the way, is not bad, Blanca said. If I were you, I would have done exactly that. He won't be able to sell half of the apartment. Who needs it when the other half still belongs to you? Mom, why should I bother with these pennies? Graciela replied. I thought about it and decided it wasn't worth it. Let's say I find someone to move in there temporarily, and I live with you for a while. But he has the right to dictate the terms. If something goes wrong, I'll have to commute and deal with the police. In the end, sooner or later, he'll get tired of it, and I'll get tired of it, and we'll still have to divide this apartment in court. I don't see the point in selling my share because, as you rightly said, who needs it? Besides, selling half of the apartment, which is essentially just a room, will be less profitable than selling the entire apartment. I've done all the calculations. The idea is good, and I was ready to implement it upon my return, as you may remember, but it will take too much time and effort. I don't need that. I want to erase him from my life as quickly as possible, so there's nothing tying me to that man. I won't even file for the alimony. What can he pay me there? Some pennies. But why do I need all this? I'm to blame for how things turned out. I should have realized what kind of person he was sooner. You've told me about Ignacio several times, but I was blind and foolish, in a word. Well, now I'll take responsibility for my stupidity. What else can I do now? Ignacio Reyes? Blanca winked at her daughter. I remember you used to talk about him completely differently. Graciela, what happened to you? It's as if someone replaced you. It feels like you flew abroad not to cure our Irma, but yourself. Oh, Mom, stop it, Graciela waved it off. Let's skip these hints for now. I haven't figured out my feelings towards him after the invaluable help he provided to me and my daughter. Right now, I have to have a serious conversation with Conrado. We need to settle everything and go our separate ways like mature, reasonable people, and then I'll figure out the rest of my life. When Graciela arrived home, in the apartment she was supposed to divide with Conrado during the divorce, he wasn't there. He only came home in the evening and was very surprised to see his wife. I thought you weren't planning to come back at all, he said. You were supposed to return much earlier, and you didn't call or text me during all this time. As if you were sitting here with the telephone glued to your ear, waiting for me to call, Graciela sarcastically replied. Well, you could refrain from being rude. How was the trip? How is Irma? Irma is fine, no need to worry. Although, to be honest, I don't care about your concerns, Conrado. You couldn't care less about anyone, neither about me nor our daughter, only about yourself. Speaking of which, that's what I want to talk about. We need to file for divorce and put the apartment up for sale. Conrado was now faced with the inevitable. It was something he strongly didn't want. After considering all possible options, he realized that he couldn't afford to buy a one-bedroom apartment in the same area. The money from the apartment sale wouldn't be enough, and he had no savings. The only way out was to move to another district on the outskirts. He absolutely didn't want to move into a single room. He had already endured enough of that in the past. He shared his thoughts with Graciela, but she didn't care. The future life of her almost ex-husband was of no interest to her. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked. "Why should I listen to it?" "Well, of course," Conrado replied, "we have a daughter. She'll come to visit me from time to time, and I should have decent living conditions." Graciela nearly choked on such audacity. "Wow, have you remembered about our daughter?" she exclaimed indignantly. "About the daughter who almost went to the other side because of you. What a great father you are. You'll meet on neutral ground, and only if I allow it. And when Irma grows up, I will definitely tell her how you gave the money, intended for her surgery, to your mom to buy a little house. She won't even want to talk to you." Conrado had nothing to say in response to his wife. He understood the absurdity and comicality of the situation, clearly not in his favor, and knew that arguing with Graciela was pointless. She would still be right. "Okay, Graciela," he said, "let's finish this pointless conversation. I hope I can live here until the apartment is sold. Unlike you, I have nowhere else to go. And yes, by law, I have the right to live here. I don't think you'll argue with that." "Why suddenly have nowhere to go?" Graciela asked. "What about your mom? What about the little house in the village? You could all settle so nicely there together. Just don't expect to live carefree. After all, you won't have any money." Conrado regretted the foolish purchase himself, which turned out to be entirely useless and brought only harm, but it cost a quite substantial sum of money. The village was gradually developing into a small town, so the cost of housing had increased significantly in recent years. Well, there was no point in discussing that now. Graciela didn't object to Conrado living in their shared apartment until the divorce. She and her daughter stayed with her parents. Blanca was pleased not only with her daughter's and granddaughter's return, but also that Graciela didn't delay the divorce and didn't seek excuses for her careless husband. The divorce process went surprisingly smoothly. Gradually, Conrado reconciled with his situation. As promised, Graciela didn't demand alimony from him in court and left the matter of helping their daughter and communication with her to his discretion. In the first year after moving to the new apartment, Conrado occasionally participated in his daughter's life and even provided some financial support. However, when Irma got a stepfather, Conrado distanced himself. "Well, you found a new father for our daughter," he sarcastically said when he learned that his ex-wife had married her boss. "He's rich and successful, unlike me. And he's been courting you for so many years. I can't compete with him." Yes, Ignacio did turn out to be a good father for both Irma and the son born a year after he married Graciela. She regretted that she had been skeptical about him for so long and had neglected to give him her attention. In his early youth, Ignacio lost his beloved girlfriend, Viola. Her death was a real tragedy for him, one he never managed to overcome. How much Graciela resembled her! From the very first day, he realized that fate was giving him a second chance. However, he had to fight for his love. After waiting for many years and observing the trials that Graciela had to go through in her unsuccessful marriage, all of it was not in vain. The age difference didn't prevent them from building a strong family, and Graciela finally stopped carrying the burden of family responsibility alone and trusting it to her husband, who was happy to be the person that her loved ones could always rely on. That's the kind of man she had been missing for many years. She realized it only after seeing what true care, love, and support were.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.